Good evening, everyone. I'm Mr.NightEchoes, and I'm here to help you drift into sleep with these chilling horror stories. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and like the video. It really helps keep the nightmares coming. I'd love to know where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you, so drop a comment below. Now find a comfortable spot, take a deep breath, and let the darkness take over.
There's something about the woods at night that never feels right. The stillness, the shadows that shift when you're not looking, the way the air gets heavy, like something unseen is watching, waiting. Before I tell you what happened, let me set the stage. It was summer, and I was staying at a small lakeside cottage community in Ontario. 12 cottages arranged in a semicircle with a park in the middle. Tall trees swaying, a lonely playground, and a picnic area that always seemed abandoned at night. Beyond that, the lake stretched into the horizon, its dark waters swallowing any light that touched it. I was there with my older brother, and during our stay, we met a kid named Brandon. 14 years old, restless, always looking for trouble. My brother liked him, so naturally, I followed along. I was younger, more cautious, but that night, caution wouldn't save me. Brandon had an idea: sneak out after dark. My brother was in no hesitation. Me? I wanted to stay. Something felt wrong, but I was just a kid, and I worshipped my brother. So, against my better judgment, I went. We crept past the cottages, through the silent park, past the swing set that rocked ever so slightly in the breeze. At first, we just sat on a bench, talking, laughing. But then Brandon, with that wild grin of his, suggested something darker. Let's go into the woods. I refused, but it didn't matter. They ignored me and started walking toward the trees, their figures swallowed by darkness. My choices? Stay behind alone, or follow. The trees loomed taller here. The further we went, the harder it became to see. Only the weak glow of Brandon's phone cut through the dark, casting jittery shadows along the path. Then, the force changed. At first I didn't notice. We were talking, laughing. But then I realized it had gone silent. Dead silent. No crickets, no wind, no distant hum of the lake. Just nothing. I opened my mouth to say something, but my brother beat me to it. Can you be quiet? I'm trying to listen. His voice was sharp, annoyed, but I hadn't said anything. I turned to him, confused. That wasn't me. His face twisted in irritation. Until he heard it too, the breathing. It was deep, wet, strained, a sickly gurgling inhale, followed by a wheezing, ragged exhale. It was close, too close, and it wasn't one of us. Then, up ahead, something moved. Two lights appeared in the trees, swinging gently, like lanterns in the wind. But these weren't lanterns, they were eyes. They glowed an unnatural electric blue, swaying rhythmically, watching, studying, almost hypnotizing. A sound ripped through the silence. A low, rattling moan. It was inhuman, like a voice drowned in smoke and sickness. A cry, a warning, a death rattle. Then it came. Branches snapped. The ground shuddered. Whatever was in the trees was coming down. We ran. I could hear it behind us, tearing through the trees, shaking the ground. It was massive, fast. I tried to keep up, but my legs were too small, too weak. My brother and Brandon surged ahead, leaving me alone in the dark. Pain shot through my legs. I stumbled. I wasn't going to make it. Desperate, I threw myself into the nearest bush, only to realize too late that it was covered in thorns. 1,000 tiny daggers ripped into my skin. My breath caught in my throat as I fought back a scream. Blood dripped down my arms, my legs, but I couldn't move because it was here. Something landed nearby with a sickening thud. I squeezed my eyes shut, forcing myself to stay still. I could hear it moving, slow, deliberate, sniffing the air, searching. I peeked through the leaves, and I saw it. It was tall, at least 7 feet. Its body was thin, almost skeletal, with sickly gray skin stretched too tightly over its bones. Its arms were unnaturally long, ending in claws that twitched with anticipation. And those eyes, those glowing, hungry eyes, were looking for me. It stayed there for what felt like hours, shifting, breathing, waiting. I barely dared to breathe. Then slowly, painfully, the first light of dawn crept through the trees. And just like that, it was gone. I don't know what happened after that. My memory fades. I remember running, branches clawing at me, blood dripping down my arms. The next thing I knew, I was on the highway, barefoot, covered in scratches. Someone found me, wandering, delirious, in my pajamas. They took me to the hospital. When I told them what happened, no one believed me. They said I was in shock, a scared kid who got lost in the woods. But I wasn't lost, and I wasn't alone. It's been 7 years, 7 years of searching, reading, looking for anything that matches what I saw. But nothing does, not yet. Two years ago, before the world fell silent, my own life was already unraveling. My mind was a battlefield, my home a war zone. I was alone, truly alone. And then, just when I thought I couldn't feel worse, he left. The only person I trusted, gone. And that's when the dream started. At first, they seemed like normal nightmares, but there was always something lurking, something wrong. Wherever I was, the shadows thickened, creeping into my vision, swallowing the light. It was like a living thing, crawling toward me, suffocating the room. And then, the people around me would vanish. Or worse, they would turn. Their faces, blank, lifeless, their eyes locked onto me, empty and hungry. It was as if they knew something I didn't. Then came the pressure, a crushing, paralyzing weight. Have you ever had your arm fall asleep? That tingling numbness? Imagine that. But everywhere. Heavy, suffocating, clawing its way around my throat, tightening, tightening. And all I could hear was buzzing. A screeching, deafening static mixed with something else. Something alive. It wanted me to know it was there. It wanted me to be afraid. The nightmares became routine, a nightly ritual of terror. Until one day, I left. I cut everyone off, packed my things, and ran. A friend took me in, Amelia. She lived in a small cabin, isolated, surrounded by trees, peaceful, safe. Or so I thought. That night I was alone. No Amelia, no safety net. I fell asleep quickly, but instead of drifting into the dream, I was thrown into it. No build-up, no warning. It was chaos. I was already running, already desperate, already terrified. I was speeding down a dark, empty road, gripping the wheel of my Jeep so tight, my knuckles ached. I had no control. The world around me was wrong. The road twisted, warped, stretched impossibly long. My phone was in my hand, Amelia's name flashing on the screen. I called her, but the voice that answered wasn't hers. A growl, a whisper, low, guttural, and right in my ear, not from the phone. No, it was in the car with me, behind me. I felt my stomach turn to ice. My breath stopped. I knew better than to look, but I did. And that's when the lights died. My Jeep was swallowed by the dark, and I knew it was here. I couldn't see, couldn't breathe. My pulse was in my throat. And then, something touched me. Not gently, not hesitantly. No, it grabbed me. A massive clawed hand wove through my hair, fingers so long they curled around my forehead. My head was yanked back, slammed into the seat. I was pinned, helpless. And the growling? It turned into something worse. It hated me. I could feel it. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. It was crushing me, suffocating me in the dark. And then, I remembered Amelia's words. Call on God, call on St. Michael. I had never done that before, but in that moment, I was ready to believe in anything. I forced the words into my mind over and over, a desperate plea. And just like that, the grip loosened, the darkness recoiled, and the thing let go. I woke up gasping, heart hammering, sweat cold on my skin. My hands were shaking, my entire body still feeling the grip of those fingers. And then I saw it, outside the cabin, watching me. Two red slashes in the dark. They weren't reflections. They weren't tricks of the light. They were eyes, massive, wrong, burning with something ancient. And they were level with the second-story window. I grabbed my phone, shaking, barely able to dial. Amelia picked up. I didn't care that it was 3 a.m. I begged her to stay on the line. She did more than that. She prayed, out loud, strong, unshaken. And as she spoke, something changed. The air lightened, the shadows pulled back, and whatever it was, disappeared. The next morning, everything felt different, lighter, but I knew better. That thing had been there. It had touched me. And if I let my guard down, it would come back. So I didn't. I started going to church. I prayed every night. And as long as I did, I never had the dream again. I never saw it again. But that doesn't mean it's gone. It just means it's waiting. James's house was my refuge. My own home? That place was a war zone. My mom's voice, sharp as broken glass, always had something to tear me down with. James's parents didn't like how much I hung around though. His dad would knock on the basement door. 3 sharp raps that sent a cold shiver through my chest. James, it's late. You need to sleep. No, he wasn't talking to James. He was talking to me. It was his polite way of saying, get out. I left early that night, tried to be the good guest for once. Maybe they'd like me more if I did. The second I stepped outside, the silence hit me. No wind, no crickets. Just the faint buzzing of a street lamp drowning in a sea of darkness. The air smelled heavy, like the ground had been soaked, even though it hadn't rained in days. Something about that night felt wrong. I was halfway home when I heard it, a low, guttural sound. Not words, not an animal, something human, but not right. I slowed my pace. The noise was coming from just ahead. Beyond the thick bushes that lined the path, my skin prickled. I felt like I was being watched. The kind of feeling you get when something is staring from just outside your field of vision. I told myself it was nothing. Just a stray cat. Just the wind, but then I saw it. A patch of silver hair peeking from behind the bushes, barely visible in the dark. I stepped into the street, angling myself away from the hedge. And that's when I saw her. An old woman, lying on the grass. Her body was twisted, her fingers curled, her mouth open wide. She was making those awful wet groaning sounds, like she was trying to speak, but something inside her throat was stopping the words from coming out. Her face, I can still see it. Her eyes were wide open. Not in pain, not in fear. Just staring, unblinking, like she wasn't looking at me. Like she was looking through me. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but I didn't. I forced myself to kneel beside her, my hands hovering, unsure if I should touch her. Her skin looked wrong, almost waxy in the dim light. I turned her onto her side, the recovery position. That's what they taught us in school, right? Keep the airway open. But she didn't respond. Just kept grunting, that same wet rattling sound. Her lips twitched, like she was trying to say something, but she couldn't. I grabbed my phone, dialed 911. My fingers felt numb. The dispatcher's voice was calm, steady. Stay with her. Help is on the way. I barely heard them, because in that moment, her hand, her ice-cold hand, brushed against my wrist. I flinched, but I didn't move. I looked at her face again, and for the first time I realized she wasn't blinking. Her mouth opened a little wider. Her lips trembled. Her chest rose and fell in shallow, jerky movements. And then, for just a second, her eyes shifted. They weren't looking through me anymore. They were looking at me. The sirens broke the silence. Red and blue lights washed over the street. Paramedics ran toward us, their voices sharp, urgent. I stepped back, feeling like a ghost in my own body, watching them work. "Are you a relative?" one of them asked. I shook my head. I didn't know her name. I didn't know where she lived. I had never seen her before in my life. So why did she keep staring at me? Even as they lifted her onto the stretcher, her head rolling slightly to the side. Her glassy, unblinking eyes never left mine. I never talked about that night. Never told my parents. Never told James. Weeks passed, then months. Then one afternoon I saw her, standing in her garden. She was alive. That much was clear. She was pulling weeds, moving slowly, her fingers trembling just slightly. She looked normal, ordinary, like nothing had ever happened. Then she turned, and she waved at me. Her face was soft, friendly, but there was something in her eyes. Something that made my stomach drop. Like she remembered me. Like she knew something I didn't. Like she had been waiting. I still walk that path sometimes, and nothing strange has ever happened again. But on certain nights, when the street is quiet, when the air is heavy, I swear I can hear it. That low rattling grunting. And I wonder, what if I hadn't helped her? What if I had just kept walking? And worse, what if she hadn't let me?